Hello and welcome to our 23rd edition of FSI Fridays. I'm Edwin, live in Boston, joined by
Johansson, live in Charlotte.
Hey Johansson, happy Friday, and to those that are watching. So what do we have lined up today?
Thanks, Edwin. With only a few months, COVID-19 has provoked a massive demand shock, setting off job losses that are exceeded the scale of the Great Recession a decade ago. The world will need a broad economic recovery that will require, in part, the development of new skills among a substantial part of the global workforce. In this session, we learn how to nurture and develop your career in times of crisis through reskilling, reinvention, and getting career development support. Then we'll wrap it up today on FSI Fridays.
So for those of you watching live or on YouTube, as a quick reminder, we'll spend around 30 minutes on today's topic and leave the last 10 minutes to address any burning questions. So please use the Q&A window and we'll monitor for questions during the presentation. If you're watching the recording, feel free to use the comments below to ask your questions. So let's get started and meet the presenter for today. Johansson, want to introduce our very special guest this week?
Thanks, Edwin. We are honored to be joined by our guest today, Ed Fandrey, Vice President of U.S. Financial Services at Microsoft. Thanks for being on the show today. Can you let our audience know what your role is at Microsoft and what your typical day is like?
Sure. Well, one, thank you so much for everybody tuning in. I'm happy to spend this, for me, Friday morning with everyone. Yeah, absolutely. Ed Fandrey. I lead our commercial financial services business. It essentially is our customer-facing business here at Microsoft that covers everything from how we, sell and provide value around our software and cloud solutions, to our customer success groups, to our services group across capital markets, banking, and insurance. And I'll pause there. I think you asked me a bit about typical day. I think just like many of you, they probably could relate. My typical day is many kind of virtual and online meetings in this new world. And then I think we'll talk a bit about this even kind of in the managing part of our topic. I really tried to be disciplined about taking the right moments of breaks and walks and just making sure it doesn't feel like you're sleeping at work versus working from home.
That's awesome. I mean, balance is absolutely key. And I find myself walking and, taking walks between calls. Exactly. But, Ed, there's always this innate feeling where we think we know what people's backgrounds are. For example, as a VP of a large organization, sales organization specifically, one would think you studied management, went to business school. What people wouldn't guess is that you used to write code and worked on NT4. Can you please tell us about your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. And one, you're right. I actually graduated with a major in psychology, which turns out helped me a lot more than it probably the initial interviewers thought. But I always had a passion for technology, a deep passion, and got into kind of computers pretty early and started my career, as you mentioned, more on the technical and development side. It was with kind of an infrastructure lens. I worked on some of the pieces around what was NT5, later called Windows 2000, with their replication engine, and how do we make sure that we keep all of the data that at that point was being replicated across global catalogs up to date. So there was this algorithm around this vector table and up to date sequencing. So that's actually was my foray into Microsoft.
That's great, Ed. Love to hear kind of the technical journey you kind of went through and to where you are today. So before we jump into the managing your career, with the pandemic, it's not only a health and humanitarian crisis, but also an economic shock. And as a leader of financial services for Microsoft, what do you see that's so hot about financial services from a transformation perspective? And maybe why should our audience care?
Yeah, I mean, you're spot on it. What's interesting is you're right. This is a health crisis, but in many ways we look at things as with a financial lens. And in many ways we even look at the market to see, how do we feel good about a vaccine? Do we know what an end is near? And we kind of have seen the market, obviously, which has been on very much of a bull run, but have kind of these up and down days. And I think even just in our own human nature is to kind of look at finances as a way to almost determine health. So I think, I answer that way because one, it is such a relevant industry. For me, my background, while I mentioned the technology piece, it always was in metropolitan areas, mostly New York, where I focused on Wall Street customers, thinking about technology, but the regulations and you can't just deploy any technology out there. How do you kind of think about that? And I think maybe just a little bit more, if I think about where we are with financial services, one of the first things that was done was really allocating these small business loans in the PPP program. And that's all technology behind that, like distributing those funds, realizing who gets what, and all of those pieces there require a tremendous amount of kind of oversight and automation that is all done from a technology point of view. So I honestly cannot think of a time where financial services and technology as a crossroads is so relevant, so purposeful. You even hear this, it's become a new, not just buzzword because it's been around for a bit, but we don't think twice about even saying fintech, right? Just because I really do think that they are at an intersection and have melded as one.
Ed, I joined financial services. I've been at Microsoft for 20 years. I've been here for about a year and a half, and I just can't fathom how much innovation is happening. And, it's really exciting time to be in financial services for sure. But let's go ahead and shift to focusing on managing your career during these times. So recently, Microsoft announced a commitment to help 25 million people acquire new digital skills necessary for the COVID-19 economy. Can you tell us about this reskilling initiative? And a second part to that question, reflecting on your career, what does reskilling to meet the new demands of the workforce mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, so for the most part, it's pretty much what it sounds like. I think the 25 million is kind of what the aspirational piece for us is, but it's really about making these online courses available, and then even the online kind of exams to kind of test where you are from a skilling point of view, in this kind of in this new world. I think to pause a bit and reflect, if you think about managing a career, especially in a time like this, it's not so much that you do things differently, but I think it's that things are more amplified. And I feel like the pace is thrown off. In some ways, the days feel super long, and you think that, okay, I'm going to get back to skilling once the world gets back to normal. But then in other ways, you could say, hey, maybe I should take advantage of some of this time I have, whether I'm not commuting or I don't feel maybe the hustle and bustle that we had previously to remote. And you could take advantage of that to kind of brush up on certifications. I think the big call out I would add, and kind of a big learning for me just in career that again is amplified, I think, during a pandemic, is just to make sure, I separate two buckets. I think about talent and I think about skills. And one of the things that I've learned is that, if you could really tap in and hone and identify your talent, it really helps you kind of accelerate and put your own authenticity to your career. But the challenge is you can get caught in a talent trap. And by that, I mean, let's say you have a talent on communicating and storytelling. You don't want your skills to atrophy. So you want both the talent and the skills. And the same goes in the reverse order. If you're all skills, hey, I have a ton of content, I've got a lot of certifications, which is all super hard work, by the way, but you haven't kind of honed the talent part of it. You now have skills without potentially that, that unique authenticity that you bring. So I bring that up because it is a balance. It is never something where you say, I'm done, I've identified my talents, and I've identified my skills. But I think regardless of where you are in your career, and like you, I'm 21 years here now at Microsoft, I constantly, especially in the technical and the financial world, always, it's a new day, right? Every few months, few weeks, sometimes few days, like I'm getting deeper in digital currency than I ever did before. It was a skill that I want to make sure I keep up on. And I don't just rely on, let's say, almost it's become a talent of having that experience of knowing the financial services world. So that's just one example. Clearly, we have a lot of products at Microsoft, from cloud, AI, what it means to kind of really parse and cleanse data and get, good result. I think there's so much that you can do, but I think the big call out is making sure you have that balance.
Thanks, Ed. Even just doubling down on that, right? The difference between talent and skills, and thinking about even managing your career as a leader.
Yeah.
And as a leader of leaders, where do you think that balance really is? And, you kind of touched on that a little bit, but what do you look for more when making a decision maybe to hire someone as it relates to maybe talent and skill?
It's a great question. And I reflect on it from my own career. And then I think to your question, think about it a lot when we're bringing talent on, specifically here at Microsoft and in financial services, I sat in a session. It's probably been 5 or 6 years now. I won't mention who gave the session, but I was one of many people in the room, but it's someone that people know well here, at least at Microsoft, and actually on the street as well. And they mentioned something that really resonated with me. And they said, so often when we think about bringing in talent, from a mindset point of view, our initial reaction is to opt them out, to think of things that they don't have, that they don't bring to the role, a certification that's not there, or a tenure that we had in our mind that they don't meet. But if you actually look at talent as opting them in, then you'd be amazed by the world that opens up to you. There's this idea and this philosophy around, we talk at Microsoft a lot about growth mindset, which is an awesome thing all in itself. But there's another one, an additional one around beginner's mindset. And I think we kind of cleanse up, even in thinking about career, whether it be bringing on talent or thinking about your own career, when we think about, well, I don't want to be a beginner, right? I want to be an expert. Right. And, sometimes we even throw our tenure out, right? I've been here, as I mentioned, 21 years. Oh, that must mean he's an expert, because if he just started, he'd be a beginner. I would caution, and this is about acquiring and bringing in talent and opting them in, and then even managing your own career. Always go back to that beginner's mindset. And if you feel that you have depth and experience, and you feel maybe you're in the expert mode, surround yourself with that beginner's mindset, because the mind has a way to trick you. And especially if you have experience, while there's a lot of benefits to that, clearly, you also have a lot less options because you've ruled them out quickly in your mind. And you'll find that when you surround yourself or even adopt a beginner's mindset, then you start really, innovating and open up the world for a lot more options. So kind of a 2-for-1 answer, but I think it has a lot to do with how I even think about the talent I bring in. Are they ambitious? Is there kind of a fire there? Do they have a growth and a beginner's mindset? And then how do I think them as additive to the team versus replicating the team? I'll always hire people better than me. The person that runs my capital markets group has more depth in capital markets than I will ever have. And that's who I always love to surround myself with to kind of make players, better and better.
Hey, Ed, I can see how that psychology background is so essential in making sure, you're hiring the right people. You're talking about beginner's mindset. And, we also have this concept called learn it all mindset. So real quick, our video producer, Alan Mock, and I were hires right out of college. We went through the Service Academy program. Johansson went through, I think, what was called the Mock program for college hires. These programs have evolved over the years, and now it's called Aspire, which is so incredibly supportive. I'm just thinking about, how supportive we are for new hires. Thinking about Microsoft internally, can you share some of the things you are doing with financial services, or FSI org, to support new in-career professionals, and what your approach is?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is, I don't normally share this stat, probably because no one asks, but I think you might be surprised to know, and actually right after this call, I have 3 of them today, that I do a ton of kind of one-on-ones and informationals with folks that we would consider kind of right out of school. Some of them here at Microsoft, and other ones also external to that. So, I do a bunch of that kind of career coaching and training. And the other thing we do, quite honestly, is webcasts like this, whether they be an all hands or one like we're doing today that's kind of more broadly broadcasted. We really think about almost the psychology of career, and we share in a growth mindset, non-fixed way, what our journeys have been. And we've only been talking for a few minutes now, but my guess is that if you just read the title or were meeting me for the first time, you probably would not have thought some of the background that I had and way of thinking. You probably thought it was more traditional. Like I came from the street. I focused on these degrees. This is who I knew to kind of get in and those things. So I think the biggest thing we can do is to just make sure we're completely supportive and realize that the folks that are coming in have that beginner mindset and so much to share with us. So I always think about, sometimes when we think about mentorships, We think about, oh, the person more senior mentors more junior. I have multiple reverse mentorships where I'm speaking to college hires, either aspirationally or that actually are here at Microsoft. And honestly, they teach me a lot about how to think about things in a new way. So I don't know if it's a direct answer to your question. I think it's probably more context and philosophy, and it's really helped us grow some unbelievable talent, as you can tell from the folks here on the call. You guys all have that background, which I didn't know before this call.
Yeah, Ed, when you think about just how the careers are being developed, and as you go through your career inside of Microsoft, we've brought this term, growth mindset, moving from that fixed mindset. But a lot of that is kind of focused on reinvention. Love to hear your thoughts and your perspectives on what does reinvention mean to you?
Yeah, thanks for that. I've kind of used that theme of reinvent in my own personal life, and then we've also translated it to kind of our fiscal year aspiration. And the epiphany, and I see the slide with the light bulb, and that was exactly it. Sometimes you think reinvent. If someone said to me, if I said to you, hey, I need you to reinvent, I'd like you to reinvent, you would almost perceive it as scrap everything you have and become new, right? So it almost would not, it would seem somewhat career insulting if someone said, I really want you to reinvent. And the reality is, reinvention is the exact opposite of that. Reinvention is taking all of the goodness and all of the great things that you have done, and really layering on, in many ways, that beginner's mindset and that new aspiration. So almost like treating every day like it's your first, treating every role or job like it's your first as well, and really truly reinventing. By the way, I think the reason why we do it isn't just because let's change the curtains in the room. We do it because that's what true transformation is. If transformation was just a change, we would call it change. It's not. It's a transformation. You have to transform, take all of the greatness that you've learned, bring that with you, and be open-minded enough to reinvent. And the one thing I'll add here is this is a trained skill. You don't meet someone that says, hey, I'm a reinventor, and someone's like, nah, I'm not, I'm fixed. It's a trained skill. I found that over the years, I've challenged myself in different situations. If you look at career, I went from purely technical to then like technical sales, to then almost purely sales, leadership of technologists, leadership of sales. These were all, I was uncomfortable, right? Because I wanted to rely on what I had. I didn't throw away what I had, but I was able to reinvent myself, be additive, and essentially transform.
And that really resonated with me. So I'll try to share my story real quick. Out of college, I was super technical. I became an exchange ranger. And you were talking about, building upon different skills and transforming, and then I became an evangelist, a developer evangelist, right, from an engineer. And then I went into sales, and, a long time ago, I was like, oh, I'm never going to be a sales guy. But, I found that it helped build my technical knowledge, combined with marketing and evangelism, and it's been great. Learning all these things during the past years, and using those skills that I've acquired over the years. So I would love to hear a bit more about your career. Can you tell us what you've learned over the years as you've experienced career transformation and accomplishments through the accomplishments and challenges?
Absolutely, and I love you sharing that, Edwin, because one of the things I think about and that I've learned over my career is there's no such thing as permission reinvention. Because if you're waiting for quote unquote permission or even recognition reinvention, others around you to totally be in on the boat, then you'll be waiting quite a long time. And I think that leads me into kind of talking a bit about my own career, which, by the way, I have no awards for a super fast career, but the benefits of that is that I did it at a pace that allowed me to be reflective and really truly learn from the roles that I had. A couple of things I'll say from a high level, because I don't think it's about me. I think it translates to all. Even this is not even a specific to Microsoft. One of the things I realized was many times, if you were to ask someone what they want in career, you'll realize that a lot of people want the same things, right? Usually it's more senior, it's maybe more money, it's more title, it's could potentially higher in the hierarchy of the blueprint of whatever company you work at. And that's fine. Those are all fine motivators. But the difference that separates the wanters from the needers are really what catapults people. And let me explain what I mean by that. When you need something, it almost becomes like being underwater and needing to take a breath. You don't think about it. It is just part, it's part of a reflex. And, you know, I've had many conversations and even personally looked at myself. I wasn't making any career sacrifices. I wanted all these advancements. I wanted someone to take a bet on me, but I actually was like, I want to do all of that and stay either right here in a geo, which is possible, but I want everything to be exactly the same. I just want maybe, you know, my office or my cubicle to move to an office, and then like and I started realizing that you have to push yourself out there and take a risk and a bet on yourself, and that's more of the need. And then it's amazing what will translate. I think the reason why, and if I think about my own career, moving into sales, even the comp program, to be personal, scared me. I was very, you know, even when you're technical, you're kind of thinking ones and zeros. I looked at kind of my pay stub that way, and moving to a world of variable comp, which, by the way, I didn't even know anyone that was in sales that could say, oh, you know, this is a good thing. Like, it was just, it sounded scary. But I realized, and this is kind of my other tip kind of in career, when you're faced with a decision, if you remove the fear and you actually tell yourself, what if I tried and succeeded? Whereas human nature says it'd be, what if I tried and failed? But what if I tried and succeeded? And you're able to take those leaps and those risks. Even if there is quote unquote failure, you'll be amazed by how you have now trained your mind that really that fear you had was not truly fear, it's anxiety. And anxiety is very different than fear. One is real and one is kind of thinking ahead. And look, we're human based, so we think about things for survival. The funny thing in career is that even though that survival instinct kicks in, you're most likely not going to be dying, right? Which is kind of like what the body would say, I'm going to, you know, not go into a pool of sharks, because that's real fear. That's not anxiety. But if you're going into a pool and there are no sharks, but you're still nervous about that, that's anxiety. So I guess I've learned a lot about how to kind of train or trick my mind to reinvent and to push myself. And the last thing I'll say on this, because I want to make sure we have time for some Q&A and some other questions, a little bit about what we talked earlier with reinvent. You know, one of the things I thought about, like when I was, it's not like I dropped being technical. I'm the same person, right? But I realized that folks like to tell a story about you. It helps. It's human nature. All my colleagues were technical. When I was going into sales, I actually got very little support. None of them were like, this is an awesome idea, Ed. And then when I got into sales, it wasn't like people embraced me. They were like, aren't you the technical guy that was talking about, you know, global catalog servers, and now you're really going to, you know, talk about like, so I think the reality is you cannot have the philosophy that anyone will know the success that you will become, but you. And don't wait for everyone around you to change and then tell yourself that you've changed. True change comes from taking that leap, knowing that, not that you're going to have haters, but there are going to be folks that just are scratching their head and they don't get it. And that's okay. But so that's kind of all part of like the risk, taking fear out, and then also building this new world around you, even though it seems out of sync, and you need to be the one that pushes through it.
That's a great perspective, Ed. You know, similar to Edwin, I was in a pure technical role as well, and I thought to myself, look, I'm never going to go to sales. And then, you know, I took the leap of faith, took bet on myself, and said, look, you know, took the fear out of it, like you said, and you know, started into it. And you know, the amount of things that people were kind of thinking about from a, you know, you're a pure technical guy to, you know, thinking about it from a sales perspective, I started to learn about all the different techniques and tricks, but also applying the technology to kind of help our customers. And so kind of taking that from a career perspective, I've learned a lot, and it's almost additive from a skills perspective, where I'm taking the previous skills like you talked about before and continue to build on it. But when you think about going back a little bit to the pandemic and COVID-19, this has created a really change in careers for a lot of people. A lot of people may have lost their jobs and may even start to think about a new career. What are some of the things that you and your leadership team are doing to help support access to career development for those that are hardest hit?
I really think the biggest challenge, the biggest person in that's blocking either a career change or advancement in career, because by the way, we gave examples of technical to sales, but for me, sales to leadership was also a new world. The biggest blocker is you. And the reason why I've been so, it's almost like your biggest critic is you. It absolutely is. The voice that's in your head, either talking you out of it or instilling fear, is all you. You'll always be your worst critic. That's why I harp so much on, I don't just mean it philosophically or even psychology, like from a psychology point of view. It's really the hardest thing I find in the pandemic is you have all of the toughness of breaking down you and with a pandemic on top of it. So it's almost like you're on a bench press. If you were benching 100, now you're benching 400. And it's that same skill set. Keep your back straight, keep your arm, like it's the same type of coaching, but you gotta have to do it at another level because you'll get in your own mind, and it'll be tough. So honestly, to answer your question about what is the leadership doing, I think there are resources which are great, but there's nothing better that you can do, in my opinion, than to really focus on some of the things that we talked about, which is not an online link and it's not training. It's really about, I'd say it's training your mind.
That makes sense, Ed. And what we're going to do also is share some of the resources later on our YouTube channel. There's things like AI Business School for Financial Services. There's a lot of resources that can help complement what you're talking about when you're, trying to reinvent yourself and find what's best for you. But what's interesting? We have a question here. Where does the financial services industry go from here? What does 2021 hold for financial services?
Yeah, I think about this a lot. It's probably human nature for any leader to say there's never been a more exciting time. So I try to not say that because it just sounds kind of like it's on a poster somewhere. But I got to be honest, I don't know another way to translate that. There's never been a better time. But let me explain so you don't have to just believe my words. 5 years ago or so, when we kind of really focused on financial services from a pure kind of vertical, and that's not a sales reorg explanation. That's a real listening to customers in financial services about actually building and developing products with a real financial services lens to it. Many financial services customers were like, no way to cloud, right? It was an on or off switch. They're like, yeah, maybe we'll use some cloud just for some compute, but for the most part, we're not going to run our business on it. Fast forward, it was less than 5 years, but let's even fast forward to where we are today. Not only is our everyone realizes the power and the benefit of the cloud, everyone wants to develop higher in the stack. So when I think about financial services, today, tomorrow, next year, what's exciting to me is no one should be writing an authentication engine anymore. No one should be thinking about how do I get, the best price on compute and storage. No one should necessarily be thinking about, what if I need elasticity, and that stuff is, the job, so to speak, of a company like Microsoft to start building that in the stack. Now we've done that, and some others have as well, but now we're also differentiating. So let's say you're an insurance company, you want to reinvent underwriting. Well, you need the right explainable AI on top of that stack. So now there's another layer. So don't even write your own. Like we have that. We have the hooks there. And what this allows you to do, or any company, is really take the top of the stack and think of it, that's how we differentiate. That's what our value add is. So look, I get so excited about what's ahead for financial services because even 5 years ago, 3 years ago, we were kind of talking about, should you even join the stack? And now it's, how can you do all of this? And so we can really differentiate and do some really cool things up top. So I honestly believe this has only just begun in many ways. And FinServ is the bellwether, I believe, and maybe I'm a bit biased, but they are the bellwether for all industries. Because what you do in FinServ can be translated to other regulated industries, and also from a size data compute. Who has more data than FinServ? I don't know. I don't think many. But so if you think about how you take the data, cleanse it, and actually parse it for something of use, that could be used across any industry. And everyone wants to get closer to their customer and know their customer better. And everyone actually wants to be marketed to, but what you want is permission marketing, meaning you're specifically telling me about things that are relevant to me, not trying to throw things against the wall and hope that I'll go for it. That's all top of the stack.
Thanks, Ed. You know, when you think about the landscape of our customers, even those that we've even talked to as part of FSI Fridays, we've started to see some of that transformation in terms of how customers can actually leverage technology to solve real challenges within financial services. As we come to the conclusion here, we want to leave some time for some Q&A. I think our audience would love to hear from you, your personal thoughts on nurturing careers during this unprecedented time.
Yeah, so here's my thought. And by the way, I don't wake up and I have this perfect mindset every day, every moment. So I think the first thing is to let everyone know, like, I get it. I'm human. I'm talking about these things. But I'm also making sure through the experiences that I've had and through the things that I'm saying that I feel very genuine about, I'm also getting myself in that mindset. And again, I think the pandemic makes that hard because we are remote in the purest sense of the form. And I'm sure the people around you traditionally are not the same group that's around you maybe when you were in an office, et cetera. Look, I do think, though, in fact, I know everything has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And one of the things I've been talking to myself about, and this is both professional and personal, is using the time that we have, all the time that we're saving by maybe not, having to do some of the things that we had to before with commutes, et cetera, and using that to actually come out of this when it ends better. Now, what does better mean? Well, it actually takes us right to where we started. From a skills point of view, are there things you can get brushed up, certified on, et cetera? From a talent point of view, are there things that everyone has a unique talent. Some of us, and it does require reflection to kind of hone in on what is that talent. Like for me, I realized, what I really love? I love growing. I love leading teams and growing them. And I actually enjoy feeling uncomfortable. It's kind of a weird thing to reflect on, but so I reflected on that in this pandemic. Not that I love the uncomfortableness of the pandemic, but I realized that I thrive through trying to figure out that puzzle of being uncomfortable and to not wait for perfect. So I think the advice I would give is probably sprinkled in all the answers that I gave or all the dialogue that we had today, which is I would really pause, reflect, make sure you get the right me time. Sure, there's time for watching, streaming movies and games and all that. And I get that. But maybe just for a minute, say, I'm going to have, we'll kind of take a lesson from Bill Gates, who years and years ago had this idea of Think Week, where he kind of went away and it was him and he read through a bunch of great ideas from others, and it would allow him to really think. I don't know if you can give yourself a week. If you can, good for you. But even if you did a think hour, and said, look, it's going to be myself, and I'm going to think through and reflect, even on some of the dialogues that we had today, and overcome the mental hurdles of the pandemic, and also know that you can use this time to actually come out on the other end in a better way, from a talent, from a skill, from a mental health point of view.
Ed, we'd love to continue more, but we actually have some Q&A from the audience. So, yep. But we want to thank you for sharing your helpful perspectives and sharing your insights on managing your career in times of crisis, right? At this view from financial services and beyond. What we learned today is perseverance is key. We can manage our destiny through reinventing ourselves. It's okay to feel uncomfortable, like you mentioned, but it helps us thrive and work through that puzzle. And let's use this time to come out the other end in a better position. We really hope that this conversation on learning, skilling, and reskilling constantly in today's unique workforce has sparked an idea or inspired you today to the audience. So, Johansson, let's go ahead and move on to the Q&A. What are some of our viewers asking?
Thanks, Edwin. So, Ed, we've got a question in here. This is actually coming from a managing director at a financial services organization today. And the question is, how do you assess when it's time to leave an organization, i.e. make an external move rather than an internal one? What are some of the factors you consider as to whether your organization offers a sufficient growth path into a future?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a lot in that question. I think it's a great one. I'll share a few thoughts, right? I don't know if this is the playbook, but I'll share some thoughts I have on that. One thing I learned is that for me, career, a lot of times people think of career as the next step will be when a job opportunity opens up. And I actually started thinking, wait a minute, I think you should more think about the timing than thinking about if a job opportunity opens up. So think about even your mental capacity on like, when's the timing for me to take on my next challenge? Believe me, when you have that mindset, things start opening up. But if you sit back and wait for something to open up, you could, run the risk of being in the game for too long and suffering even mental fatigue. So I've actually done a pretty deliberate job of making sure I'm really firm on my timing versus, waiting for roles to open up. The other question was about internal versus external. I love this question. Look, there's a trap, and I have been such a proud employee of Microsoft for such a long time. It could seem like, oh, you just have a comfort zone in Microsoft and you've just figured it out at Microsoft. I got to be honest, I always think about what role do I have here and how does that translate on the outside? For example, I had one role at Microsoft. I was the chief of staff for worldwide sales and marketing. It was obviously a very internal role. Chief of staff can mean many different things at many different companies, even our own company. But I always thought, how does it translate outside? So I guess to the question of, hey, do you do inside, outside? I honestly would look at both. I would always kind of interview or have discussions. It doesn't have to be super formal with folks outside so they can resonate and reflect on your experiences. And I gave that chief of staff example because you do kind of an internal role, especially like a staff role, because you think about what's my next internal job. And I had some of those thoughts, but I also would do a bunch of testing to my network, especially my external network, when I was in that role. And they're like, Ed, I don't know all the things that you do, and I don't know all the acronyms that you use, but I'll tell you what you're doing. You're at the forefront from helping a company transform from on-premise software to cloud, thinking about data sovereignty and where you open a data center, thinking about compensation plans for sales. These are very translatable skills, anywhere in the market. And I would really focus and hone in on those areas. So my answer to the, hey, internal or external is really do both. So just in summary, I would look at timing, for yourself on your next career. And I would also look at both internal and external. And then look, you'll make the right decision. And regardless of if it's internal or external, I think if you give yourself both, you'll have a great perspective.
Thanks for sharing that, Ed. I'm sure I could speak for a lot of us in FSI. We hope you don't look too hard outside, that you stay here for a while. So thanks for sharing that perspective. We have a question from Anonymous. Thank you for your inspirational advice. I'm struggling with work-life balance. Kids are at home, for school, trying to stay safe. My spouse just lost their job. What advice do you have as I try to stay resilient through this?
Yeah, I think it's almost like no one cares about your career more than you. And that's an okay statement. That's not like, oh, I need to surround myself with people who think, more about my career than I do. No, it's human nature. And I think to the question, it's kind of the same thing about your own mental health and the work-life balance. You are never going to receive an email that gives you the right day off or the right time, because it's just too hard to think about. I mean, I even think internally, we have an organization of about 900 people. I've even thought as a leader, hey, maybe we take it easy on Fridays. But then you start realizing, wait a minute, like, why am I picking Friday? Like, maybe someone really needs that time off on Wednesday. Like, and I started thinking, and this is the answer, or at least my reflection on the question. I started thinking about, you need to make your own safe mental time. So I think on the work-life balance, I have the same thing, right? I have two daughters actually who are working right now, and I'm hoping my bandwidth is good enough to kind of talk to you. But I have to take my own mental breaks. And I want to spend time with them. So I try to do it when, they're on their, lunch breaks, et cetera. My manager, an amazing, leader at the company, is not going to send me a mail and say, hey, take this out, because they don't know it. So I guess my advice to you would be, one, I think it's great, and it sounds like you're going through some hardships, like many of us are, but everyone's is unique, and I feel for you. I think the fact that you're identifying that you need those breaks is a huge step. And I think you have to self-service and think about you first. I'll end with something that I used to see all the time because I traveled, probably like many of you. You know, when you're on the airplane and they say, please put your oxygen mask on first and then help others. I remember thinking that sounds really selfish, but I started realizing, no, the only way you can help others is if you have the right level of oxygen. And I think it's the same thing as far as, you know, taking your own break. So be selfish. Selfish sounds like a bad word, but it's not in times like this. And make sure you take your own personal breaks, and you need to check in with yourself because you know best.
That's great advice, Ed. We've got another question in here. It's around financial services. They're a financial services employee today. What trends are you seeing that are going to be essential from a career perspective for this next wave of digital transformation? And maybe what are things that they should maybe upskill or look to skill?
Yeah, so I definitely think about, you know, both tech and fin service we spoke about earlier are both where the puck is going type of industries. And to me, that's exciting. And maybe because it's that uncomfortable piece that I shared earlier. Look, I definitely thinking about the intersections of, you know, what are some processes and things that we have today that maybe take 15 days that we can make take 15 minutes? What are some interactions, even as an end user and a customer, that we have today that maybe we're not taking advantage of all the right, you know, technology to make that experience deeper, richer, and think about other cross-sell type of opportunities that are a win-win for both the customer and yourself. So I think, in short, what I'm talking about is I think joining webcasts like this and really starting to think about what are the right technical skills, what are the right industry skills, and how do I match them to be unique and differentiate is what I would truly focus on. And keep pushing yourself. Never feel like, I certainly don't. I didn't join this thinking I'm a finished product. Let me give you a bunch of advice because I figured it all out. Heck no. But I've had time to reflect, just like many of you, on a career. And I keep kind of pushing that forward and think about that word we talked about, which is reinvention. Is what you're doing reinventing yourself, or you're just getting deeper in who you already are? I push you to that uncomfortable zone of reinvent.
Hey, Ed, we have time for one more question, maybe 30 seconds. I really wanted to fit it in. It's actually tied to the last question you had, or the answer about reinvention. I'm a highly technical person, but I'm looking to further my career. What advice would you share with me to help me take on a more sales role, as there could be perceptions of being too technical?
Yeah, no, look, it's funny. I think thematically, just because my background was tech into sales, I don't want to make it sound like, hey, that's a career progression. It's actually just a very different path. It's not like one is better or worse. I actually think, and again, this is probably a biased view because I share kind of what the person asking the question had. I think what's great about having a technical background is I feel like, you know, there's a lot of really challenging, difficult things there that take a lot of experience. I found that sales is really about bringing your authentic self. You know, one of my biggest fears when I moved into sales, for example, was the sales folks that I knew, I was so different than. You know, even from more of an introverted point of view that I was, I'm like, I don't think I could do the entertainment. All these things that I defined as sales, I was like, I'm not good at. But then I realized that, hey, if I'm actually give myself, and I'm authentic. And by the way, what I got to bring was I actually really knew, not that other folks didn't, but I really knew the technology I was selling. And I actually knew probably what someone didn't need to buy an 11th instant messenger, but did they have a presence engine? Like, there was a bunch of stuff that actually was very unique to me that someone deemed as, oh, you're good at sales. But it actually was just being my authentic self. So I guess to answer the question, I think the fact that you've identified that you want to kind of take this shift, I wouldn't sell yourself short and think that you don't sell. I mean, the reality is, even at Microsoft, even though we have 150,000 people here, there's really only two roles. You write code, you sell code. And I don't write code. It's been a long time since that. So I've always been on the sales side. So I would just push yourself into thinking about how do you bring all the knowledge you have in a reinvention and be authentic about how you storytell that, how you add value, how you think about those things, because you have a lot more depth than you're probably giving yourself credit for. Because I don't think there's a course in sales that you come out and like say, I'm, you know, Azure certified, and now I'm sales certified. I think it has a lot to do with kind of your rapport, your ability to tap into authenticity and be genuine, which it sounds like you're in a reflective state. You're already very much on your way there.
Great. Thank you, Ed, for joining us. Looks like we're out of time. Thanks again for attending. For those that are watching live or watching this on YouTube, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe or register for FSI notifications. We're also open to constructive feedback, so please send us your comments and suggestions at aka.ms/FSI Fridays feedback. Be sure to watch all the previous recordings of the sessions on FSI Fridays YouTube channel, where you can post any follow-up questions that we didn't cover today. And also, don't forget to subscribe and like if you enjoyed this video. So Edwin, we have an awesome lineup for the rest of Development December. Why don't you give an audience a preview of what's happening for the rest of the month?
Absolutely. So here's our upcoming lineup for Development December. On December 11, we join David Atik and Eric Baran and discover how GitHub is the de facto facility to build workload migration and modernization strategies in the cloud. That is the true power of open source adoption, and that is how we can deliver rapid customer success with GitHub as the source of truth. And finally, on December 18th, we'll speak with Charles Morris and Akiva Shmuelov to discuss the trends we're seeing in data science and AI across financial services, how firms can maximize the return of the AI investments, and how Microsoft is partnering with our financial services customers to create value using data science and AI. You won't want to miss it. Thanks again, and see you next time on FSI Fridays.